You run a household together like a well-oiled machine. Groceries get bought. Bills get paid on time. The kids, or the memory of raising them, get talked about at dinner. From the outside, and even from most angles on the inside, it looks like a marriage that works. And it does work, in the sense that nothing is broken. But somewhere in the last few years, without either of you deciding it on purpose, you became something quieter than partners. You became excellent co-managers of a life you used to actually share. Here's what surprises people about this one. Nobody in this story is unhappy, exactly. Nobody's plotting an exit. There's no affair, no explosive fight, no single Tuesday you could point to and say, that's when we became roommates instead of a couple. That's the part that makes it so hard to name. If something had broken, you'd know to fix it. Instead, something simply stopped being added to, year after year, until the absence became the new normal and nobody noticed the exact moment it happened. Think about where this pattern actually took root. Somewhere in your 30s or 40s, with 2 careers and a house full of kids, being a good partner and being a good logistics manager were functionally the same job. Handling the schedule was love. Splitting the nighttime feedings was love. Showing up to every recital was love, expressed in the only currency either of you had time to spend. Nobody sat you down and warned you that this currency would eventually stop being enough, because for a couple of decades, it genuinely was enough, and there was no reason to think it would ever need to change. Think about what an actual evening looks like now. You come home. She's already got dinner going, or you do, depending on the week. You ask about her day, she asks about yours, and the answers are accurate and complete and take about 40 seconds each. Then the television goes on, or you're each on your own phone on opposite ends of the same couch, and the evening quietly closes without either of you having learned a single new thing about the other person. You did this last night too. You'll do it again tomorrow. Nobody's upset about it. That's what makes it so easy to miss. Here's the turn most people don't expect. This isn't a story about 2 people who ran out of love. It's a story about 2 people who got extremely good at running a household and quietly stopped practicing the much harder skill of running a marriage, because the first one has visible deadlines and the second one doesn't. Bills have due dates. Emotional intimacy doesn't send a reminder email. So the thing without a deadline is the thing that slowly stopped getting attention, not out of neglect exactly, but out of the simple physics of where urgency naturally goes. There's a reason this specific version of drift shows up so heavily in marriages your age, and it isn't random. For 20, 30 years, the 2 of you were running a genuinely demanding operation together, small kids, a mortgage, careers that ate entire decades, maybe aging parents stacked right on top of it all. In that season, partnership often looked exactly like logistics, because logistics were the crisis. Who's driving to practice? Who's handling the school pickup? Who's covering the shift when the other one's flight gets delayed? You bonded over managing chaos together, and it worked, because managing chaos together is its own kind of intimacy, even if it doesn't look like candlelight. Here's where the story turns again, because that's exactly the problem. The chaos eventually ended. The kids grew up, or the crisis seasons thinned out, and the operational partnership that used to double as your emotional connection didn't automatically convert into something else. It just kept running on the same settings, except now there was nothing urgent left to manage together, and the 2 of you were sitting in a much quieter house without ever having built a second kind of closeness underneath the first one. The logistics marriage worked great when logistics were the whole job. It has nothing left to offer once the job changes. A lot of couples in this exact position will tell you, if you ask them honestly, that they don't fight anymore. And they say it like it's good news. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the absence of conflict isn't peace, it's distance dressed up as maturity. You can't really fight about something you've both stopped discussing. Fighting, at minimum, requires 2 people who still care enough to argue about the same thing. A lot of roommate marriages have simply run out of shared things worth arguing over, because they've run out of shared things, period. Here's the twist inside the twist, the part that catches a lot of couples off guard. Both of you have probably told yourselves some version of the same reassuring story, we're just in a quiet season, things will open back up eventually, once retirement settles in, once the grandkids are older, once life slows down. That story isn't a lie exactly. It's just been running on repeat for longer than either of you wants to admit, and eventually has a way of becoming permanent if nobody ever actually schedules it. There's a specific moment a lot of people in this situation can point to, once they look hard enough. It's usually small. You're getting ready for bed, and she says something offhand about a memory from years ago, something you used to talk about all the time, and you realize you can't remember the last time either of you brought it up. Not because it stopped mattering. Because somewhere along the way, the conversations that used to fill your evenings quietly got replaced by logistics, and neither of you traded them back in for anything. Here's a layer almost nobody says out loud about this specific pattern. Some couples actually find the roommate arrangement comfortable, and feel guilty about that comfort, because comfort feels like it should be evidence that something's wrong. It isn't automatically evidence of anything. Two people can genuinely enjoy peaceful, low-friction cohabitation and still be missing something neither one wants to name, because naming it means admitting the peaceful part isn't the whole story. Here's a turn worth pausing on, because it reframes the whole problem. A lot of couples assume the fix for a roommate marriage is more time together, so they schedule date nights, book trips, clear the calendar. Sometimes that helps. But time together isn't the actual ingredient that's missing. Plenty of roommate couples spend enormous amounts of time in the same room, the same car, the same bed, and still manage to stay strangers inside all of it. The missing ingredient isn't proximity. It's curiosity, the specific, slightly effortful act of wondering what's actually going on inside the person across the table, instead of assuming you already know because you've been married to them for 3 decades. There's a reason that assumption is so easy to fall into, and it isn't laziness. It's actually a kind of misplaced respect. You've known this person for so long that assuming you understand them feels like intimacy, when really it's the opposite. People change quietly, in small increments, over years. What she worries about at 55 isn't what she worried about at 35, and if nobody's been asking, you might be operating on a decade-old model of a person who's moved on without you noticing. The roommate marriage isn't just two people who stopped talking. It's two people slowly living next to an outdated version of each other, updated only by inference, never by actually asking. This shows up in small, almost invisible ways if you look for it. She mentions a friend's name you don't quite recognize, and you nod along instead of asking who that is now, because asking feels like admitting you've lost track. You mention something from work and she nods the same way. Two people, both quietly falling behind on the small print of each other's lives, both too polite or too tired to ask for the footnotes, filling the gaps with assumption instead of information. None of it feels dramatic in the moment. It just quietly compounds. This is the honest turning point, the one worth sitting with the longest. The real risk in a roommate marriage was never a dramatic ending. Most of these marriages don't end. They just continue, indefinitely, as two people sharing a mortgage, a bed, and increasingly little else, right up until one of you gets sick, or one of you dies, and the surviving partner realizes how much distance had quietly built up in the years nobody was paying attention. The danger isn't divorce. The danger is two people growing old next to each other instead of with each other. Here's another layer worth naming honestly. Some men in this situation privately worry that trying to reconnect will feel forced, or worse, will surface things neither of you wants to deal with, old resentments, unmet needs, the slow accumulation of small disappointments that never got voiced because there was never a good moment. That fear is exactly why so many couples choose the comfortable silence instead. It's not that reconnecting is impossible. It's that reconnecting requires opening a door that's been closed long enough that nobody's sure what's built up behind it. And yet the alternative carries its own quiet cost, one that rarely gets discussed until it's too late to ignore. Couples who let this pattern run for decades often describe a specific kind of grief when a health crisis finally forces the issue, sitting in a hospital waiting room next to someone you've shared a house with for 30 years, realizing you don't actually know what they're afraid of, what they regret, what they still hope for. That's not a failure of love. It's a failure of upkeep, the same way a house can be structurally sound and still need its foundation checked every so often, where the cracks show up exactly when you can least afford them. Here's what tends to actually shift this pattern, and it's smaller than people expect. It isn't a weekend away, though that helps. It isn't a big dramatic conversation about the state of the marriage, though sometimes that's necessary too. What actually moves the needle is much less glamorous, deliberately reintroducing one piece of shared curiosity that has nothing to do with logistics. Asking a real question at dinner instead of the status check questions you've been running on autopilot. What are you actually thinking about lately? What's something you haven't told me in a while? Small, and slightly uncomfortable, because you've both gotten out of practice, and any unused muscle feels stiff the first few times you use it again. The uncomfortable truth underneath all of this is that competence and connection are not the same skill, and a marriage can score perfectly on one while quietly failing the other. You can run a flawless household with someone you barely know anymore, and for years, nobody watching from the outside would ever notice the difference. The good news, if there is one, is that this particular problem doesn't require ending anything or starting over. It requires noticing what quietly got dropped somewhere in the logistics years, and picking it back up on purpose, even if it feels a little rusty at first. A marriage that became a partnership of tasks can become a partnership of people again. It usually doesn't happen all at once. It happens one real question at a time, at a dinner table that's gotten very good at talking about everything except the two of you. I'm Gray. And this is the Quiet 60s, where we talk about the things men in their 60s actually think about, but rarely say out loud. If this sounded like your house, leave a comment below. And if you're new here, subscribe. There's more of this coming.